Hello and welcome to Million Dollar Moments, a video podcast brought to you by Channel 4 and the Professional Fighters League to talk to you about all the goings on in the fastest growing sports league in the world. Yes, I'm talking about the PFL. I am actor and MMA fan Blake Harrison, and joining me to balance out my lack of practical fight knowledge, and let's be honest, just lack of knowledge in general, is a man who is the brightest mind in all of MMA. He is someone that's fought at the highest level. He is a coach. He's a world-class commentator. His fight breakdowns are stuff of legend. He needs no introduction, but I've given him a long one in the hope that one day we will be best friends. It's the outlaw Dan Hardy. How are you, Dan?
I'm good. You've really sold me there. I don't know if I can live up to that kind of expectation.
I'm trying to put so much pressure on you to just alleviate it from me, if that's all right.
Thanks, mate. That's a good place to start. Yeah. No, this is good. I'm looking forward to this. Looking forward to talking with you. Obviously, we've had a few conversations about MMA in the past, and both huge fans coming at it from a different angle. And I think we're both fascinated by what the PFL are going to be doing over here.
Absolutely. Is there anything in particular you are especially excited about when it comes to the PFL? Because they've got such a unique format.
I mean, I like the narrative. I like the fact that, these fighters know who they're facing next. They're in the changing rooms, warming up, watching some fights, knowing full well that if they win their next fight that night, they'll be up against, the winner of the fight that's on currently. It creates a really good storyline to follow. And the fact that there's so much money on the line as well, it really incentivizes these fighters. And the other thing as well, the speed in which you finish your fights, of course, it makes a difference as well. Yeah. So there's a lot of different things that motivate the fighters to get spectacular finishes. And we've got some really competitive matchups as well. So, it keeps things interesting.
Absolutely. And on that note, if there's anyone that's watching this that maybe hasn't seen much of the PFL before, it's different to other MMA organizations. As you alluded to, Dan, it's a meritocracy. There's no politics involved. It's not about, how you rock the microphone after your fight or anything like that. It's like, if you win your fights, particularly if you win them in exciting fashion, you are going to be in the top 4 of your league. You'll make it to the semifinals. You win that fight. You get the chance to fight in the finals for the PFL championship and a life-changing $1 million. So in terms of the league format, every fighter has 2 fights within their league. You get 3 points for a win, 1 point for a draw, no points for a loss, obviously. So that is kind of familiar for us, isn't it? It's your football-based Premier League, whatever format. The thing that makes it exciting is what you were speaking about there, Dan, is the bonus system. If you finish your fight in the 3rd round, you get 1 extra bonus point. If you finish it in the 2nd, 2 extra bonus points. But if you finish your opponent in the 1st round, you get 3 extra bonus points, meaning you could walk away with 6 points. And as I said, the more points you have after those 2 fights, the higher up the league you are. And if you're in the top 4, you go through to the semis, the final, and then the chance to fight for $1 million. The really exciting thing about that, Dan, is if you're in your 2nd fight as a fighter and you need 6 points to advance and make it through to the semifinals, keep that $1 million dream alive, you have to go all guns blazing, don't you, to secure that 1st round finish? Otherwise, the dream's over. So how is that going to impact the fighters mentally going into a fight like that? And how are we as fans going to massively benefit from that?
Well, first of all, it incentivizes risk taking, which is usually where fights are won and lost. I think giving people, a reason to chase a finish in the 1st and 2nd round, it causes fights to be a bit faster paced. It's also another challenge as a martial artist as well, isn't it? Because of course, when you come into a fight, you want to win and win spectacularly, but you also can't force the finish. And this is something that we hear coaches saying all the time. Don't force the finish. The finish will come, but if you're chasing it in that 1st round, it can be a lot more pressure, which it's a different challenge entirely for a fighter to deal with. I mean, I like it because I'm a firm believer in the idea of a martial arts contest being the quickest and efficient finisher. I mean, that for me was always my fighting style. And, it kind of almost takes you back to the old tournament days where people were fighting multiple times in an evening because they knew that, they didn't want a 15-minute scrap where they were bruised and battered because they had another fight to go on to. This just means that they have time to physically recover, but that incentive to win quickly is still there. And of course it adds a different storyline to it. And who doesn't want an extra chunk of cash for a knockout?
We're in just such a good place for UK MMA at the moment. And I think the PFL have noticed that, which is why we're doing a show like this and why they've specifically put their semi-final or two of their semi-final shows in Cardiff and in London. Can you speak to how exciting it is as not just an MMA fan, but as someone that is coaching young fighters as well, to see the European scene, the UK, particularly MMA scene, we've seen some exciting UFC cards lately in London. We've got the PFL coming to London. It seems to be the best time ever to be a UK MMA fan, but surely like a coach as well, when you see these young fighters, when it comes to organizations like Cage Warriors, the PFL are starting the European series soon as well. So there's a lot to be excited about, isn't there? How is it for you as someone that's been in MMA for so long and as a coach of young fighters coming through?
You're exactly right. It's the most exciting time that we've ever had in UK mixed martial arts. The growth of the sport right now, from a coach's perspective, we've got a gym. We're just about to open a second, much bigger gym because our classes are too busy. The kids' classes are absolutely rammed. The junior squad is growing tremendously. We've got loads and loads of amateurs wanting to compete because they're training 5-6 days a week. That for me is the biggest movement, is the amateur scene. We've got the English Mixed Martial Arts Association. We've just had the Four Nations tournament up in Liverpool. The amateur scene around the world, because of the IMAFs, is incredible. And you've got to think, we've got hundreds and hundreds of amateur fighters that are getting loads of experience traveling internationally and fighting around the world, and they're going to be ready to turn pro soon. They need somewhere to go. And I think that the timing of the PFL ready to receive some of those fighters coming over, we're going to be absolutely swamped with really strong young professionals soon. And, the Professional Fighters League is the place for them. It gives them structure. It gives them a target to aim for. And there's good money to be won, which is very, very a rare thing to see in mixed martial arts. So, it's nice to not only have that incentive, but also to know that they can continue through their career, aiming towards those big paydays and those bonus points.
Yeah, I mean, it must be so difficult for young fighters now when they're, working on building sites or teaching or doing whatever it is that they're doing in order to facilitate being able to pay for training and lodgings and all that kind of stuff. And when you see someone like the PFL coming in and starting this stuff up and going, hey, we're going to pay you really, really well for someone of your caliber, for someone with your lack of experience, don't worry, we're still going to pay you pretty well. Again, it must really excite you as a coach to know that these young fighters can just focus on fighting and getting better and taking their career seriously rather than having those distractions, because it must be so hard to try and get into a sport where you can try and be an elite level athlete, and you have to be to train hard, weight cuts, all those things, but you've still got to go and work a 9 to 5 in a supermarket or a building site or whatever it is that they're doing at that time.
I'm excited for it. I just think we're at the right point now where we're going to have a lot of amateurs in the next year or two turning professional, and the scene is going to be absolutely swamped with really, really high level talent. The talent that he's currently training with the top European fighters right now. You go to any of the teams, GB Top Team or Renegade or Next Generation, and the mat is absolutely rammed with fighters that are training on a daily basis with the world's most elite fighters that we've got in the region. It's an exciting time. I'm excited to see how this develops and the opportunities that it creates for these young fighters.
There's a lot to be excited for next season already, isn't there? There's young prospects coming through. Some of them will even be fighting on the undercards of this year's semi-finals. Who are you particularly interested in seeing fight on the undercards and potentially next season to see how they cope with a regular season next year?
I mean, a lot of bright prospects have had some good opportunities on these recent cards, but the one that honestly stands out to me was the one that opened up the whole season. That was Simeon Powell. He was the first fight on the night. It was at Clinton Williams. He was in a clinch. And he was kind of stepping out of the clinch and just lifted that lead knee and caught him under the chin. And, I was watching this kid training the other week at GB Top Team. He's very, very slick. No one can get close to him because of his range and his reach. And he's got this very, very well-rounded striking skill set that makes him dangerous for anybody that he faces. I mean, you saw the ease of that knee. I know you loved it as well.
Yeah.
It just made it look effortless. The commentators even were like, "Whoa, what happened?" There was no big wind up to it or anything. I think he's got a very bright future ahead of him, not only with the skills that he's got, but also with his, his physiology, height and reach advantages over everybody he faces.
So, Dan, when we're talking about the PFL season so far, what are the most exciting moments that you would aim fans to go and watch? If they haven't seen these exciting moments from the PFL season so far, and they need to get over to the Channel 4 Sport YouTube page, check out KOs, finishes, fights so far that have really impressed you, where would you point them towards?
I mean, you kind of spoiled for choice. That you could rattle through a few of the events that, they're all up there as individual videos. You could just literally sit and cruise through them. And there's some fantastic scraps there, real back and forth ones. As far as finishes go, one of my favorites all the time to watch is Rory MacDonald. Every one of his performances, is clinical. And his fight against Cooper, Rene Kichoki, he finished him with very, very skilled individual. I think it was PFL 3 that was. A very, very skilled individual. I've trained with him a couple of times myself up in Montreal at TriStar, and he's an absolute monster. Always interested to watch Rory MacDonald fight, and that for me is probably one of his best finishes in his career. And then the counter right from Delaya when Schiffel kicked him to the body and he blocked the body kick and just tucked up nice and tight and fired that right hand down the pipe. And that was for me one of the best finishes this season so far. And then, my favorite has to be Stevie Ray, of course. I'm so excited for that rematch with Pettis. I think, Stevie's had such a turbulent career. He was out for 3 years. He did a couple of professional grappling events and, was really trying to find something that he could get his teeth into. And then losing his debut by decision, I know it was very, very frustrating for him. So then to get the opportunity to fight Pettis, it's an opportunity that doesn't fall into your lap very often, and he took it with both hands, and such an unusual finish as well. Like a body triangle twister. It's just something that you don't hardly ever see in mixed martial arts. So to have such a highlight reel finish against a legend like Anthony Pettis, and then he's got the opportunity to reinforce it in the events coming up.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I was like, in my head, I was thinking to myself, it's almost like Rocky and Apollo Creed. You've got like that guy that was on the Wheaties box and was the UFC and WEC champion. He's got the Showtime kick in his locker. That one of the probably most viral MMA moments of all time was that Showtime kick. And Stevie Ray, as you said, hadn't fought for the best part of 3 years, comes in, loses his debut. Anthony Pettis coming off of a win over Miles Price in his first PFL fight by triangle. Again, you're talking about someone with great jiu-jitsu. Anthony Pettis, we all know him for the flashy kicks and that kind of taekwondo style, but he's got great jiu-jitsu as well. And for Stevie Ray to pull that out, he had 0 points going into that fight and then locks up, I think it was a second round finish. So he locked up 5 points and just snuck in to that final playoff place. And as you say, again, now he fights in New York against Pettis in the rematch. Do you think that Anthony Pettis was in any way underestimating Stevie Ray because of all those things we've just spoken about? And is there anything now that Anthony's going to be far more prepared for to make it more difficult for Stevie in this fight in the semi-finals?
Well, I certainly think he's going to try and keep Stevie on the outside a lot more this time around. Stevie's he's going to have to work harder to close distance and grapple with him. But I also think, I think people will still be underestimating Stevie's ground game. It's not like it was an orthodox submission where he just, he just dominated Pettis from top position and there was nothing he could do about it. A lot of people will think it was a bit of a fortunate position to find himself in. But the way he locked that up, and then you could hear his corner team shouting, "Squeeze!" He knew what he'd got. It's an unorthodox submission, but we're seeing a lot more inverted triangles and those kind of things in recent MMA. People are finding new ways to disrupt the human body's functioning, you could say. I think that Pettis is going to be very aware of his ground game, which might open it up for Stevie to start lighting him up on the feet as well. Pettis might struggle with the pressure that Stevie can put him under, and with the confidence that Stevie's got from that first win. And, we might want to push Pettis back in the early rounds. I certainly would if I was fighting him. If I was Stevie Ray coming in off a win over him, I'd want to bully him in the first round and try and, box him up a little bit, break his confidence early, because he's always got that ground game he can fall back upon. And it's much easier to grapple with someone if you're already in boxing range. Level changing under a combination and putting the fighter on the floor is easier when they're trying to throw back. I'm excited to see where Stevie goes. And you're right, it could be very much a Rocky type story. The ups and downs of his career and, the highlight moments. And this has got to be one of them. And, he could be on for another one in New York coming up.
Oh, what a feel-good story that would be if he was able to move through to the finals now against Pettis again in New York. One of the other fighters I think we absolutely have to mention, the only fighter to reach maximum points in the PFL regular season, is Larissa Pacheco in the women's lightweight division. With the women's lightweight division, it's interesting because you've got Larissa Pacheco, who's got 2 first-round finishes, looked like an absolute beast, maximum of 12 points. No other fighter, regardless of gender, in any other weight class, has achieved maximum points. But that division feels like it's all about Kayla Harrison, doesn't it? And Larissa's lost twice to Kayla in previous seasons. Is there anything from Larissa that you've seen this year that makes you go, maybe she could cause Kayla Harrison trouble this time around? Or do you just go, look, no one's the antidote for Kayla right now?
I think people are always going to assume that Kayla's going to be able to close the range and get her hands on her opponent. And once that happens, it's very rare that anybody can slow her down. The one thing that I would say Pacheco's become quite good at, in my opinion, is framing to create space during her finishing combinations. Sometimes she can get herself a bit tangled up and a bit too excited. But I think in the last couple of finishes that we've seen, she's been very composed and she's been a bit more, her level's been a bit lower. She's had her forearms in the way to start framing. And if she starts using those kind of techniques against Kayla and doesn't get too overexcited, it might at least create some space to avoid those underhooks and the takedowns that will follow. But she's a first round finisher, and we've had a couple of events where Kayla's been ahead of her on the card. Kayla's been in her dressing room ready to fight, watching Pacheco absolutely destroy 2 opponents. You don't know what that's going to do for Kayla's confidence. She knows that she's dealing with someone that's improving all the time. And Pacheco in the last couple of fights has looked like a different fighter to me. I'm interested to see how this one pans out. Of course, people expect Kayla to win, but it's those moments of space where Pacheco can start throwing, and she's got enough power to hit one time and change the fight entirely.
Other fighters that have done incredibly well this season, 2 of them are in the same weight division. You're talking about Amari Akhmedov and Wilkinson as well, up there at light heavyweight. They're not going to be fighting each other in the semi-finals. A lot of people are probably thinking, because they've both got 11 points from their seasons, that they're probably the shoe-in for the final of the light heavyweight division. Do you see that happening, or do you see an upset in those light heavyweight fights? I think Josh Silveira is fighting Akhmedov now, and he came in as an alternate and got one of my favorite knockouts of the season so far against Martin Hamlet. He hit that high kick. Hamlet just kept going. This amazing ability to just try and just keep going, stay in the fight. Threw a spinning attack, it sort of missed. Then another spinning attack that sort of half landed, and then Silveira hits him with another head kick. He goes down. It was one of those really frantic KOs that fight fans are just like, oh, and then he comes back, like, oh, and then he goes again. And I love KOs like that, when you think it's not just one-way traffic. There's someone, the person that gets knocked out or has been rocked is offering something back. Do you see Silveira troubling Akhmedov at all? Do you see Akhmedov and Wilkinson making it to the finals of the light heavyweight series? How do you see those 2 and how they line up? Because I'm assuming that because they've both got 11 points this season, people are going to be thinking those 2 are a shoe-in for the final, right?
Yeah, I mean, you would think so. That's certainly the way it's looking. And it looks like, we're going to get 2 more finishes and then another finish in the final, however it goes, because these guys are just rattling through opponents. Yeah. As far as Akhmedov against Silveira, I think the biggest problem that he's got to watch out for is that front kick. We saw that, in Silveira's last fight, snapped the front kick to the midsection, and that was what really started off the whole thing. that's what opened up the opportunity for the head kick, which then, began the tumbling towards the finish. Akhmedov, though, we've seen him get caught with really big shots and come through some adversity. I think at 205, he's a scary individual anyway. I mean, you've got to think, at one point in his career, he was a welterweight and he's shifted through the gears and he just looks a much more healthy version of himself now. I think he's got more to give. And you can imagine how immensely powerful he is when he grabs a hold of you. I think, of course, the money's got to be on him to get through to the final. But we can't count out that striking game with Silva, and that front kick is going to be a problem for Akhmedov, especially because the way he stands, he's like a kick shield, ready to receive that front kick. And Wilkinson's incredibly impressed me as well. Again, looks a lot more powerful than he has done at earlier points in his career. Looks a lot more healthy, and he's just running through opponents. The only thing I would say about Akhmedov is because he's slightly shorter and because he's got that strong wrestling game as well, Wilkinson can't get overexcited with his flurry and combinations that usually get in the finish. He has to maybe pick his shots a little bit more and expect to have to level change and defend a few takedowns from Akhmedov. Because, once Akhmedov's on top of you, he works to mount, he gets that arm triangle, and then you're done. You can't keep that shoulder pressure off. And you're just going to go to sleep. That's the way he finishes if he doesn't knock you out. Scary individuals and a really interesting weight class. That's it's going to deliver us at least 3 more good fights, I would say.
Absolutely, very excited about that. Let's talk about those UK cards, because the PFL have seen what's going on in the UK. They've seen the excitement from the fans. They've seen all this talent coming through in the UK. It's not by accident that they've decided to host 2 of their semi-finals on UK soil. We've got a card on the 13th in Cardiff, and we've got one on the 20th in London. Powell, as you say, is fighting on the undercard of that fight. But the big fights on that card as well will be Brendan Loughnane versus Chris Wade. What do you think about this fight?
I think it's incredibly competitive. Of course, Chris got that big win, the big decision win over Lance Palmer, which was a massive statement to everybody else in this tournament. But Brendan, as we know, is a very skilled individual. He's had a couple of really challenging fights so far in this season. But he knows what he's got with Chris Wade. He's got a well-rounded fighter that's got a very interesting striking skill set, as we saw in the Bochniak fight, and he also is an incredibly strong wrestler. Brendan does better with fighters that come at him. He does better with fighters that are happy and willing to engage him, because it allows him to be a fluid counter striker and counter wrestler, which he's very good at as well. I think, to be honest, these two fit each other like jigsaw pieces. I think they are perfect complements to one another for a very fast-paced mixed martial arts fight. I expect level changes. I expect head kicks. I expect ferocious striking exchanges in the pocket. It's honestly hard to pick one way or the other. I think they've both got to respect one another's power. And I think the deciding factor will be how the wrestling goes, whether Chris is able to enforce a wrestling game and put Brendan on the back foot, or whether Brendan's able to counter wrestle and wear Chris out in some way. It's a very competitive one. I keep going back and forth on it, and I honestly couldn't tell you who I think is going to win right now.
And our final featherweight fight that night in the semi-finals is Yoshi Kudo versus Bubba Jenkins. Kudo had a great fight with Brendan Loughnane that was stopped because of a clash of heads. Kudo got a cut, couldn't continue. Brendan won on the scorecards, even though I think we'd only had a tiny bit of the third round by that point. Kudo's taking on Bubba Jenkins. Kudo is the orchestrator of one of my favorite knockouts of this season so far. He folded Alejandro Flores with from my layman's perspective, just an amazing overhand right. How do you see the Bubba Jenkins Kudo fight going?
Well, I expect Kudo to try and close him down and hurt him. Bubba Jenkins is an experienced individual that's very good at managing the pace of his fights. And, if we go back to Kudo's first fight against Brendan, he had a really good first round. The second round, he seemed to slow down a little bit, and that's where Brendan started to pick the pace up. But then, we were 2 or 3 minutes into the third round. I think it was 3 minutes into the third round when the clash of heads happened. So it went to the scorecards on the technical decision. And honestly, it could have gone either way. I wouldn't have been surprised if Kudo have taken that decision, because it was such a competitive fight. There were moments in it where he really tested Brendan. So I'm keeping my eye on him. He's been one of the most impressive, especially with that knockout over Flores. You know, he's one of those guys that's going to return in the next season and be a real contender. I think after the Brendan fight, it taught him that he's got to put his foot on the gas. And I think we saw the result of that in his last one. And I think he's going to have to do the same thing against Jenkins. Otherwise, he could get ground down to a decision.
Yeah. And if you're in Cardiff on the 13th of August, you've also got a lot to be excited about, because there's the heavyweights, and we all love a bit of heavyweight MMA. Denis Goltsov topped the leaderboard in the heavyweight division, and he's taking on Bruno Capoloza, who's last year's champion in the heavyweight division. How do you see that playing out?
You know, the thing that surprises me about every one of these heavyweights that's in this tournament, in this division, is the speed of them. I mean, we're seeing really athletic heavyweights, and when you've got guys that can move at that speed with that kind of striking ability and power, honestly, it really is a coin toss. There are a lot of fighters in the heavyweight division that could just, I mean, Capoloza is very strong. Delia is I mean, that counterpunch that he landed after that the covering of that body kick was a thing of beauty. They all move so incredibly quickly. I just don't think you can count any of them out, to be honest. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Delia in the final. But as far as Goslov and Capoloza, it's who lands first. These guys are so fast. I'm used to seeing heavyweights kind of plodding and slow and big overhands swinging and stuff. And, we're seeing a new generation of heavyweights right now with footwork and athleticism and very well-rounded games. I'm just buzzing to watch that one. It could be an absolute train wreck either way.
Absolutely. And the other side of the coin that we've got for Cardiff is the welterweights. And, we've got Carlos Leal versus Sadibou Sai, who's got a win over the top seed in the division, which was the star that is Rory MacDonald, who takes on Magomed Umalatov. I mean, we all love Rory, don't we? I mean, for most of us, he was part of one of our favorite ever fights in that fight. Was it UFC 189 or something like that on the undercard of Conor versus Mendes? Rory MacDonald challenges Robbie Lawler for the welterweight strap. And it's got to go down as one of the greatest fights of all time. It was a phenomenal fight that Rory sadly lost in that. I think that fifth round, his nose was just absolutely busted. But has Rory still got it in him to go all the way in the PFL? We've seen him go up and down a little bit in his career. He's still a star. A lot of fans still love him, and it's great for that Welsh crowd to be able to see Rory fight live. But what are his chances of progressing against Umalatov?
I think his chances are very good. He's a very technical fighter. He's also very big and strong for the weight class. I like I said, I've trained with the guy, and I was very, very impressed with him. Not only the speed at which he thinks, but also his athletic ability. We also have to remember that when he was competing in that memorable fight against Robbie Lawler, he was a young man. There's still a lot of miles on the clock. He's still, he's still not, he's not old like me. He's got some time still, and he's training in a very smart gym around people that know how to stay healthy. I mean, you look at GSP. I think he's found a cocoon secret. He seems to be getting younger by the day. I think Rory's
got that tricep machine that he's selling all the time on Instagram. That
is that what
young.
It is? And he's got one of those pools that he's got in his backyard and the floats. Yeah. I don't know what he's doing, but he's found the fountain of youth somehow. And you've got to think, he's passing on some of that wisdom to Rory. Yeah. GSP's always training, always in the gym. I'm sure that Rory's on, Rory's got questions for him when he sees him. And you've got to think, other greats that have got long careers, that greats like Alistair Overeem and Gegard Mousasi, guys that have got 40 or 50 fights in their career before they've hit, their 30s. Like, they have ups and downs in their career. They have ebbs and flows, but they pick up so much experience. And I feel like, experience going into this one against Umalatov is going to be really, really important, because, it's experience that keeps you away from those single punch knockout finishers. And what we saw in the last event from Magomed was just thunderous power. And of course, if he lands on Rory and connects cleanly, he will knock him out. But it's going to be the wisdom and the technical ability of Rory that keeps him in this fight. He could have the toughest chin in the world, and you can't withstand that kind of power from Magomed. So it's going to be wisdom that keeps him safe in this fight. Unfortunately, he's got plenty of it.
Rory finishes top of that group in the welterweight division, but he did lose to Sadibou Sy. Is Sy actually the favourite going into these semi-finals because he's got a win over the top seed in Rory, and he takes on Carlos Leal?
I mean, it's a good question. It's definitely a demon that's going to be haunting Rory, and it's something that he's not going to want sitting on his record without it being contested. I think it makes for an interesting storyline in the future. But I also think fighters can have bad nights, and it's like this fight coming up with Stevie Ray and with Pettis. It's a rematch, and the first fight didn't go the way people expected it to. Stevie Ray's got an opportunity to prove people a second time that he's the better one of the two, and Sy's also going to get that opportunity here. If he's, he's also got the psychological advantage, which you have to love, because he can talk about it, he can use it against Rory, and Rory can't deny it. So I love a storyline and I love a rematch.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. Well, I think that's all we're going to have time for today. If you want, please go and check out the Channel 4 Sport YouTube page. Every fight we've spoken about, all those amazing knockouts we've spoken about, they're on that YouTube page for free. Just check it out, watch that, get caught up to date before the PFL hits their semi-finals. They're fighting in New York. If you're a British MMA fan, please be supporting Stevie Ray against Anthony Pettis in New York, and then get super excited for August 13th in Cardiff, Wales, for August 20th in London, England. There's some big fights, some MMA superstars coming your way. And then after all that, it'll be the night of champions. 6 titles will be decided. $6 million will be up for grabs. So check it all out. Get excited for the PFL.